Hi there. It's July the 6th, and we're continuing our journey through the Acts of the Apostles, Luke's sequel to his Good News, and we're in chapter 24, reading the whole chapter, verses 1 to 27. Paul has been taken to Caesarea Maritima, which is the headquarters of the Roman occupation in Palestine, after a riot has happened in Jerusalem, and the tribune there, Claudius Lysias, hearing that there's a plot against his life, wants to keep him safe because he's a Roman citizen, and so takes him to Caesarea, where he's been imprisoned. After 5 days of his being there, the Jewish leaders come from Jerusalem to Caesarea to present their case before the Roman governor Felix. Now, in order to do this, they bring with them an advocate, someone who knows the Roman system. In Greek, he's called Orator, which is where our word rhetoric comes from. He's a particularly well-trained orator, well-trained speaker, and he knows the ways of the Romans. And so he comes, and he it is who presents the case. His name's Tertullus, and it's he who presents the case for the Jews, which they back up. So he opens up before Felix, and he gives the greetings, and he honors Felix for his good government. But then he accuses Paul before them of stirring up trouble and of teaching a heresy. And it's interesting, he uses the word in Greek heresis, heresy we would call it, a division, some different way of thinking. And this is the heresy of the way, and it's leading people astray. He says not only that, he says, but Paul has defiled the temple. There's this accusation that Paul brought non-Jews into the temple, which of course he didn't. But they are seeking to build up a case against him. Felix then asks Paul to speak. Paul doesn't have anyone speaking for him, but Paul also, he's a Roman citizen, of course, and he uses the same opening declaration of being grateful for Felix's reign and so on. But then Paul defends himself by saying, look, I actually believe the same thing that these men believe. I follow the law and the prophets, the teachings of our fathers. I believe in the resurrection, as do many of these people. And yes, I do believe that in following the way which they call a sect, they call a heresy. But for me, I'm being judged, he says, only because I believe in the resurrection. Of course, he knows he's talking about the resurrection of Jesus, but actually he homes in on the fact that there is nothing against the Jewish tradition which he is speaking about. And having heard this, Felix decides that actually he's going to do some delaying tactics. Unfortunately, Paul now falls foul of the Roman bureaucratic system and also of the corruption that's in the system. And so what happens is Felix says, I will make my decision when Claudius Lysias comes down from Jerusalem. Well, Claudius Lysias has actually already written a letter, so whether he comes or not is a moot point. And Paul actually is continuing to be held in prison. And it says during this period that he's held in prison, Felix continues to see him. Now, Felix actually also has a wife called Drusilla, who is Jewish, and together they consult with Paul a number of times and hear more about the way. So they talk to Paul on an ongoing basis about what he has to say. However, no Claudius Lysias appears, and a whole 2 years happen. A whole 2 years pass by of Paul being in this prison in Caesarea. It also says that Felix and Drusilla, when they listen to Paul, get afraid because Paul is talking about life after death. He's talking about end things. He's talking about things that they don't really want to hear about. The other thing we learn from Luke's account is that Felix is actually after money. He's looking for a bribe from Paul to be able to get out of prison. But Paul is not about to act corruptly and to pay that. And so because Paul isn't coming up with the goods and paying him the monies, he's held in prison for a whole 2 years. In fact, he's held until there's a change of governor from Felix to Porcius Festus. And this happens, and at that time, when the handover happens to Porcius Festus, Felix wants to continue to curry favour with the Jews, and so he keeps Paul in prison. He keeps them held there to keep them happy. It's such a shame to see how Paul is being used in this corrupt and political way. It really helps us to understand Paul's journeyings and Paul's message in the context of his day. He's not living in a free, open society here. He's living in a society which is corrupt and full of palm rubbing and of bureaucracy. But Paul is still faithful to the Lord. He won't give in to paying bribes. He won't give in to the corruption. He stands, even through this 2 years, he stands firm in the belief that God has called him, that he will go to Rome. And so even in this time of languishing in this Roman prison in Caesarea for 2 years, he stays faithful to God. May we, through difficult circumstances and through opposition, stay faithful to God like Paul, take him as our example. Have a very good July the 6th.